Hidden beneath many failed relationships is a truth that most people never discover. The more effort someone puts into keeping an avoidant close, the more likely that avoidant may begin pulling away. It sounds backwards, it feels unfair. Yet this pattern repeats itself every day in relationships around the world. Many people spend months, sometimes years, believing they were too loving, too patient, or too understanding. The reality is often much more complicated. Most people think avoidants leave because they do not care enough. But in many cases, they leave because the relationship begins to create a type of pressure that feels overwhelming to them. What makes this even more surprising is that the behaviors creating that pressure are usually coming from someone with good intentions, someone who wants more connection, more honesty, more closeness, more security. In other words, someone who genuinely cares. That is what makes this topic so important. Some of the most common relationship advice can actually make things worse when an avoidant attachment style is involved. Actions that seem loving on the surface can quietly trigger distance. Efforts meant to bring two people closer can produce the exact opposite result. And because these mistakes often look harmless, many people never realize they are making them until the relationship begins slipping away. By that point, confusion takes over. Questions start piling up. Why are they becoming colder? Why are they responding less? Why does every attempt to fix things seem to push them even further away? The answers are not always obvious. In this video, you will learn the 4 biggest mistakes people make with avoidance, and why these behaviors trigger withdrawal instead of connection. You will discover what is happening beneath the surface when an avoidant suddenly becomes distant. You will learn why reassurance can sometimes backfire, why making someone the center of your world can create unexpected pressure, why emotional conversations do not always produce emotional closeness, and why trying to change an avoidant often leads to resistance rather than growth. More importantly, you will learn what healthy connection actually looks like and how understanding these patterns can completely change the way you view relationships. One of the most surprising lessons comes near the end of this video. It is a mistake that many people make without realizing it, and it quietly damages attraction, trust, and emotional safety over time. Once you understand it, many confusing relationship experiences suddenly start making sense. So stay with us until the very end, because each mistake builds on the one before it, and missing even one piece can leave you with an incomplete picture. Welcome to the channel, where we explore human behavior, psychology, relationships, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives. If you enjoy learning the deeper reasons behind why people think, feel, and act the way they do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a future video. Now, let's uncover the 4 things you should never do with an avoidant if you want the best chance of building a healthier connection. The first mistake is one of the most common, and it often begins with good intentions. When someone starts feeling distance from an avoidant, their natural reaction is usually to seek reassurance. They want clarity, they want certainty, they want to know where they stand. So they begin asking questions. Do you still love me? Are we okay? Is something wrong? Why are you acting different? Why are you pulling away? On the surface, these questions seem completely reasonable. Most people would assume that asking for reassurance strengthens connection because it creates communication. But for an avoidant, repeated reassurance seeking can create a very different experience. What feels like a search for connection to one person can feel like growing pressure to another. The avoidant starts feeling as though they are being asked to constantly prove their feelings, explain their behavior, and manage another person's anxiety. Over time, what began as a simple question becomes a responsibility they never wanted to carry. This is where many relationships enter a confusing pattern. The more distant the avoidant becomes, the more reassurance the other person seeks. The more reassurance they seek, the more pressure the avoidant feels. Then the avoidant creates even more distance. That additional distance increases fear and uncertainty, which leads to even more reassurance seeking. Before long, both people feel frustrated. One person feels ignored. The other feels trapped. Neither person fully understands why the relationship is becoming more difficult. One of the lesser-known facts about avoidant behavior is that many avoidants are highly sensitive to anything that feels emotionally demanding. This does not always mean they do not care. In fact, many avoidants care deeply. The problem is that emotional responsibility can feel overwhelming to them. When someone repeatedly asks for proof of love or commitment, the avoidant often experiences that interaction differently than intended. Instead of hearing, "I want to feel close to you," they may hear, "You are responsible for making me feel okay." That subtle difference changes everything. Many avoidants grew accustomed to handling emotions independently long before they entered adult relationships. Whether because of childhood experiences, family dynamics, or personal coping strategies, they learned to rely on themselves. Emotional self-sufficiency became part of their identity. As a result, they often struggle when another person expects frequent emotional reassurance. They may view it as dependence rather than intimacy. They may interpret it as pressure rather than love. The situation becomes even more complicated because reassurance only works temporarily. A person asks, "Are we okay?" The avoidant responds, "Yes, we're okay." Relief appears for a few hours or a few days. Then uncertainty returns. Another question follows. Then another. Then another. The cycle never truly ends because reassurance does not solve the deeper fear underneath. It only quiets it briefly. The avoidant begins noticing this pattern. They start feeling like no answer is ever enough. No amount of reassurance permanently fixes the concern. As a result, they may become less willing to engage in those conversations. This is why many avoidants slowly withdraw when they feel emotionally monitored. Frequent emotional check-ins can create the feeling that every interaction is being analyzed, every text message becomes evidence, every delay becomes suspicious, every mood change becomes a discussion. Over time, the relationship starts feeling less like a place of comfort and more like a place of evaluation. For someone who values independence and emotional space, that environment can feel exhausting. Another important point is that avoidants often associate freedom with emotional safety. Most people assume that closeness creates safety. For avoidants, too much closeness too quickly can create the opposite reaction. Freedom allows them to regulate themselves. Space allows them to process emotions privately. Independence allows them to feel in control. When repeated reassurance seeking begins reducing that sense of freedom, the avoidant may instinctively create distance in order to restore balance. Ironically, many people believe that asking for reassurance will bring the avoidant closer. Yet in many situations, the opposite occurs. The avoidant starts responding more slowly. Conversations become shorter. Emotional availability decreases. Not because they necessarily care less, but because they feel overwhelmed by expectations. The relationship starts feeling heavier than it did before. Healthy connection does not come from constantly asking whether love exists. It comes from building experiences that allow trust to grow naturally. When trust grows, reassurance becomes less necessary because confidence begins replacing uncertainty. Unfortunately, many people never reach that stage because they become trapped in the reassurance cycle long before trust has a chance to develop. But reassurance is not the biggest mistake. The second mistake is even more damaging because it attacks something avoidants protect at all costs. One of the fastest ways to create pressure in a relationship with an avoidant is to make them your entire world. At first, this behavior often appears romantic. Movies celebrate it. Songs glorify it. Many people are taught that true love means putting one person at the center of everything. They begin spending all their time with that person. They stop investing in hobbies. They neglect friendships. Their attention becomes focused almost entirely on the relationship. To them, this feels like commitment. To an avoidant, it can feel like the beginning of an emotional burden. Many avoidants become uncomfortable when they sense that another person's happiness depends heavily on them. They do not want to become someone's entire support system. They do not want to feel responsible for carrying another person's emotional world. Yet that is exactly what overinvestment communicates. When someone starts canceling plans, abandoning interests, and organizing their entire life around the relationship, the avoidant often notices it quickly. At first, they may appreciate the attention, but eventually a question starts forming in the back of their mind. What happens if I need space? What happens if I want time alone? What happens if I cannot meet all these expectations? The more dependent the other person becomes, the more pressure the avoidant feels. This reaction confuses many people because they believe their devotion should strengthen the bond. They think giving more will create greater closeness. But avoidants often see the situation differently. Instead of feeling loved, they may feel responsible. Instead of feeling connected, they may feel trapped. The relationship slowly transforms from a source of enjoyment into a source of obligation. One reason this happens is that avoidants are highly sensitive to perceived dependence. Emotional dependence often signals future expectations. Expectations create pressure. Pressure threatens freedom. And freedom is something avoidants guard carefully. The moment they sense that someone else's emotional stability is becoming tied to their behavior, alarm bells begin ringing internally. A person may not say it directly, but their actions communicate the message. Their mood rises when the avoidant is present. Their mood crashes when the avoidant is distant. Their confidence depends on receiving attention. Their happiness depends on receiving validation. Without realizing it, they place the avoidant at the center of their emotional well-being. That position feels overwhelming to someone who already struggles with emotional responsibility. The more this pattern develops, the more likely the avoidant is to seek distance. Not because they enjoy hurting people, not because they want the relationship to fail, but because distance feels like the only way to reduce the growing pressure. The relationship starts feeling less balanced. One person is carrying expectations, the other person is carrying fear. Healthy relationships require two complete individuals. Each person should have interests, friendships, goals, and sources of fulfillment outside the relationship. This creates stability. It reduces pressure. It allows connection to grow without becoming suffocating. Avoidants often respond much better when they feel they are part of someone's life rather than the entire focus of it. Many people unknowingly create a situation where the avoidant becomes their primary source of comfort, confidence, and emotional regulation. Once that happens, every shift in the avoidance behavior feels significant. A delayed response creates anxiety. A quiet day feels threatening. A need for space feels personal. The relationship becomes emotionally fragile because too much is resting on one person. The avoidant senses this dependence. They recognize that their choices carry increasing emotional weight. What began as affection starts feeling like responsibility, and responsibility, when it becomes too heavy, often triggers withdrawal. Now, here's where most relationships enter a dangerous cycle. As distance increases, many people believe the solution is deeper conversation. They assume that talking more will solve the problem. They want answers, they want emotional clarity, they want vulnerability. So they initiate serious discussions again and again. They ask for explanations. They ask for feelings. They ask for emotional transparency. While communication is important in any relationship, timing matters far more than most people realize. Avoidants often struggle with vulnerability, not because they lack emotions, but because vulnerability can feel unsafe. Many avoidants process emotions internally before sharing them. They need time. They need space. They need room to understand what they are feeling before discussing it with someone else. When another person pushes for immediate emotional openness, resistance often appears. Repeated relationship conversations can become overwhelming. Every interaction starts revolving around feelings, concerns, problems, and emotional analysis. The avoidant begins anticipating these conversations before they even happen. A simple request to talk may trigger anxiety because they expect another intense discussion about the relationship. The person seeking connection usually believes they are helping. They want honesty. They want openness. They want growth. Yet the avoidant experiences the situation differently. They feel cornered. They feel pressured to produce emotions on demand. They feel expected to share thoughts they may not fully understand yet. One of the biggest misconceptions about emotional intimacy is that it can be forced through conversation. In reality, emotional safety develops gradually. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be extracted through persistence. The harder someone pushes for immediate vulnerability, the more likely the avoidant is to retreat behind emotional walls. This is why pressure often shuts avoidants down instead of opening them up. Their nervous system interprets the pressure as a threat. Instead of becoming more expressive, they become more guarded. Instead of becoming more available, they become more distant. The exact outcome the other person fears becomes more likely because of the strategy being used to prevent it. You cannot force emotional safety. You can only create conditions where it becomes possible. Many avoidants eventually open up when they feel accepted rather than pressured. They share more when they feel understood rather than analyzed. They become vulnerable when they trust that their emotions will not immediately become the center of another difficult conversation. Emotional safety grows in environments where patience exists, yet many relationships never reach that point because the pressure arrives too early and too often. Every unresolved concern becomes another discussion. Every emotional shift becomes another conversation. The avoidant starts associating closeness with emotional exhaustion. Once that association forms, maintaining distance begins feeling easier than maintaining connection. And the most surprising part is that the person initiating these conversations usually believes they are saving the relationship. They do not realize they may be intensifying the very dynamic they want to change. But the fourth mistake is the one that quietly destroys attraction. The fourth mistake is often hidden behind good intentions, which is exactly why it can be so damaging. Many people reach a point where they become convinced they have finally figured out the avoidant. They start reading articles, watching videos, learning about attachment styles, and studying relationship psychology. At first, this knowledge can be extremely helpful because it creates understanding. It helps explain behaviors that once seemed confusing. It reveals patterns that previously felt random. But there is a line that many people cross without realizing it. They stop trying to understand the avoidant and start trying to fix them. This shift changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. The moment one partner begins viewing the other as a problem that needs solving, the relationship starts losing its sense of equality. Instead of two people learning about each other, one person becomes the teacher while the other becomes the student. One person becomes the expert while the other becomes the project. Most people do not intend for this to happen. They genuinely believe they are helping. They believe that if the avoidant could simply understand themselves better, everything would improve. So they begin offering advice, then more advice, then even more advice. Soon every conversation starts sounding like a lesson. The avoidant becomes aware that they are constantly being analyzed. Their behaviors are labeled. Their actions are interpreted. Their emotional responses are explained to them. Every disagreement suddenly becomes evidence of their attachment style. Every need for space becomes another symptom. Every difficult moment becomes another opportunity for correction. For someone who values independence, this experience can feel incredibly frustrating. Many avoidants already spend a significant amount of time analyzing themselves internally. They often think deeply about their feelings, even if they do not openly discuss them. What they usually do not want is another person acting as their personal therapist. They do not want someone constantly explaining why they do what they do. They do not want to feel like every interaction is being evaluated through a psychological lens. One of the most common examples appears when people begin sending attachment-style content repeatedly. A video here, an article there. A podcast episode the next day, then another video, then another article, then another discussion about why the avoidant behaves the way they do. At first, this may seem harmless, but over time, the message being communicated becomes difficult to ignore. The message is not, "I want to understand you." The message starts sounding more like, "I want you to become someone different." That distinction matters. Most people become defensive when they feel that someone is trying to change them. This is not unique to avoidance. Human beings naturally resist control. We all want the freedom to make our own choices. We all want ownership over our own growth. The moment growth feels forced, resistance begins. Avoidants often react even more strongly because autonomy is especially important to them. Independence is not just something they enjoy. It is often something they rely on to feel emotionally safe. When another person starts telling them how they should behave, how they should communicate, how they should think, and how they should process emotions, that sense of autonomy feels threatened. As a result, the avoidant may begin pushing back, not necessarily because the advice is wrong, not necessarily because the observations are inaccurate, but because nobody enjoys feeling controlled. One of the lesser-known truths about personal growth is that people rarely change because someone else demands it. Lasting change usually happens when a person develops their own awareness. It happens when they reach conclusions for themselves. It happens when motivation comes from within rather than from external pressure. This is why many attempts to fix an avoidant fail. The person doing the fixing becomes increasingly frustrated because progress feels slow. The avoidant becomes increasingly frustrated because they feel criticized. Both people end up exhausted. The relationship slowly transforms into a cycle where one person keeps pushing and the other person keeps resisting. What makes this especially painful is that the person trying to help often believes they are acting out of love. They genuinely want the relationship to succeed. They genuinely want deeper connection. They genuinely want healthier communication. But good intentions do not always create good outcomes. Sometimes the harder someone tries to change another person, the more distance they create. The avoidant begins feeling like they are no longer accepted as they are. They start feeling like every interaction contains an unspoken message. The message says you would be easier to love if you were different. Whether that message is intended or not, Many avoidants eventually start hearing it. Once that happens, emotional safety begins disappearing. The relationship starts feeling conditional. Instead of feeling accepted, the avoidant feels evaluated. Instead of feeling understood, they feel managed. Instead of feeling loved, they feel repaired. Nobody wants to spend their life feeling like a project. The moment someone feels like a project instead of a partner, resistance begins. This resistance often surprises people because they assume the avoidant should appreciate their efforts. They assume the avoidant should be grateful for all the research, advice, and emotional labor. Yet relationships are not therapy sessions. Partners are not rehabilitation programs. People are not personal improvement projects. Healthy relationships allow growth while still maintaining acceptance. That balance is incredibly important. Acceptance does not mean approving of unhealthy behavior. Acceptance does not mean tolerating disrespect. Acceptance does not mean abandoning standards. It simply means recognizing that lasting change belongs to the individual. You can support growth. You can encourage growth. You can model growth, but you cannot force growth. Growth happens through awareness, not through pressure. This truth becomes even more important when discussing what actually works with an avoidant. Many people spend so much time focusing on what avoidants are doing wrong that they never stop to ask a different question. What creates the conditions for healthy connection? What allows trust to grow? What reduces distance instead of increasing it? The answer is often much simpler than people expect. Healthy relationships balance connection and space, not connection without space, not space without connection, both. This balance is difficult because it requires patience, it requires confidence, it requires resisting the urge to control outcomes. One of the most effective things you can do with an avoidant is respect boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood. Many people hear the word and immediately think of rejection. They assume boundaries create separation. In reality, healthy boundaries create safety. Boundaries tell people where they stand. Boundaries create predictability. Boundaries reduce confusion. For avoidance, boundaries often provide emotional breathing room. When that breathing room exists, they feel less pressure. When they feel less pressure, they become less defensive. When they become less defensive, connection has room to grow. This does not mean accepting endless distance. It does not mean tolerating unhealthy behavior. It means recognizing that healthy connection cannot exist without healthy space. Another important factor is maintaining your own life. This point cannot be overstated. Many relationship problems begin when someone slowly abandons their individuality. Their hobbies disappear. Their goals become secondary. Their friendships fade. Their personal growth slows down. Everything starts revolving around the relationship. This creates enormous pressure. Healthy attraction often grows when two people bring full lives into a relationship. They have interests. They have ambitions. They have experiences. They have identities beyond being someone's partner. Avoidants often respond positively to people who maintain this sense of independence, not because avoidants dislike closeness, but because independence reduces pressure. It communicates emotional stability. It shows that connection is a choice rather than a necessity. Another powerful habit is clear communication. Many people assume avoidants dislike communication. That is not always true. What many avoidants dislike is emotional intensity that feels overwhelming. There is a difference. Clear communication focuses on honesty. It focuses on facts. It focuses on needs. It avoids unnecessary drama. It avoids mind games. It avoids emotional guessing. Instead of trying to force an avoidant to read your mind, you communicate directly. Instead of assuming they know what you need, you express it clearly. Instead of creating emotional tests, you create clarity. Clarity reduces anxiety. Clarity reduces misunderstandings. Clarity creates trust. Trust is one of the most important elements in any relationship with an avoidant. But trust cannot be rushed. This is another mistake many people make. They want certainty immediately. They want commitment immediately. They want vulnerability immediately. They want complete emotional openness immediately. Trust does not work that way. Trust develops through repeated experiences over time. It develops through consistency. It develops through reliability. It develops through patience. Many avoidants need time to believe that closeness is safe. That belief rarely appears appears overnight, it forms gradually. Every respectful interaction contributes to it. Every honest conversation contributes to it. Every moment of consistency contributes to it. The more someone tries to force trust, the more difficult trust becomes. This is why emotional chasing is usually ineffective. Chasing comes from fear. Chasing comes from urgency. Chasing comes from the belief that more effort will immediately solve uncertainty. Yet chasing often creates the opposite result. The harder one person pursues, the more pressure the avoidant feels. The more pressure they feel, the more distance they create. The cycle continues. Breaking that cycle requires a different approach. Instead of chasing, focus on stability. Instead of forcing closeness, create opportunities for connection. Instead of demanding certainty, build trust gradually. This approach may feel slower, but it is often far more effective. One of the strongest signs of emotional security is the ability to remain grounded even when uncertainty exists. This does not mean suppressing emotions. It does not mean pretending not to care. It means maintaining emotional balance. It means refusing to let fear control every decision. People with strong emotional security do not need constant proof of love. They do not need endless reassurance. They do not need complete control over every outcome. They understand that healthy relationships contain uncertainty. That understanding creates calm, and calm often creates space for genuine connection. The final piece is perhaps the most important of all. Focus on your own security. Many people become obsessed with understanding the avoidant while ignoring themselves. They analyze every text. They study every behavior. They spend hours trying to decode every action. Meanwhile, they neglect their own emotional health. They forget to ask an important question. Why does this dynamic affect me so deeply? What fears does it trigger inside me? What insecurities become activated? What patterns am I bringing into this relationship? These questions matter because healthy relationships are not built by fixing one person. They are built by two people becoming more self-aware. The stronger your own emotional foundation becomes, the less likely you are to get trapped in unhealthy cycles. You become less reactive. You become less dependent on reassurance. You become more confident in your boundaries. You become more capable of recognizing what is healthy and what is not. And perhaps most importantly, you stop making every decision from a place of fear. Because in the end, the goal is not to make an avoidant stay. The goal is to create a relationship where neither person feels trapped. As we come to the end of this discussion, one thing should be clear. Most people do not push avoidance away because they are selfish, toxic, or uncaring. In fact, the opposite is usually true. Most of these mistakes come from a genuine desire to create love, security, and connection. People ask for constant reassurance because they want to feel closer. They make someone their entire world because they care deeply. They push for emotional conversations because they want honesty and intimacy. And they try to fix or change an avoidant because they believe it will help the relationship grow. The intention is often good. The problem is that good intentions do not always create good results. Throughout this video, we explored 4 behaviors that can quietly create distance instead of connection. We talked about how constantly chasing reassurance can make an avoidant feel trapped. We looked at why making them the center of your entire life can create overwhelming pressure. We discussed how forcing deep emotional conversations before emotional safety exists can lead to resistance rather than vulnerability. And finally, we uncovered why trying to fix, diagnose, or change someone often creates the exact opposite of the growth you hope to see. The truth is that pressure has a strange effect on relationships. The harder you push for certainty, the more uncertainty can appear. The harder you chase connection, the more distance can develop. The harder you try to control the outcome, the less natural the relationship becomes. This is especially true with avoidants, who often react strongly to anything that threatens their sense of freedom, independence, or emotional safety. That does not mean you should accept unhealthy behavior. It does not mean you should ignore your own needs. And it certainly does not mean every avoidant relationship is meant to work. What it does mean is that understanding the psychology behind these patterns can help you make better decisions, set healthier boundaries, and approach relationships with greater awareness. Because sometimes the fastest way to lose an avoidant is to hold on too tightly. And sometimes the best way to build connection is to stop trying to force it. If this video helped you see avoidant behavior from a new perspective, take a moment to let us know by